So I can't be the only one noticing that it seems like arcade racing games are slowly starting to take a back seat in the racing genre when it comes to releases that can actually stick with people, right? What I mean by this is a game that comes out and actually has fans hooked for more than the week that it drops, and also can develop a good community and fan base. We need more pure arcade racing games that can maintain their relevancy and are great to play and enjoy. Instead, it seems like we have gotten games that are either only on PC or games that have been ported over from mobile, neither which is ideal for long-time enjoyment and community growth in my opinion. Everything new is either a simcade, not in production anymore, or has an identity crisis. Over the past decade, the arcade racing genre, which at one point, believe it or not, was a dominant force in gaming, has quietly slipped just into the shadows. It is not completely gone, so don't get that twisted, but also just seems to be an afterthought when it comes to game making. Franchises like Burnout and Midnight Club have disappeared completely, while even the franchises that we know and love, like Need for Speed, have seen very inconsistent releases, which now with the recent news of them being on a hiatus completely, is about as inconsistent and as bad as it can get. This steady decline isn't just about shifting what players want, but it also shows what the gaming industry is moving towards in the future. In this video, we're going to be discussing the decline of arcade racers and why it is happening, along with why we need the genre to still keep going. As open world action games, live service models, and sim racers dominate the landscape of gaming, arcade racers, which prioritize fun over realism or a grind, are now seeming to struggle to justify their place in a marketplace built around retention and monetization. Understanding why they faded isn't just about nostalgia, because y'all know I don't really like talking about nostalgia or nostalgia baiting. It's just a wake-up call about what gaming could lose when fun has to take a back seat because companies want more money, aka EA. In the past, arcade racing games thrived in what many would call the AA or middle tier space. Games that weren't massive blockbusters but also still carried enough budget and polish to deliver a good, entertaining experience. These games were fast to develop, bold creatively, and didn't need to sell tens of millions to be considered successful. Titles like Burnout and Blur didn't reinvent the wheel with arcade racing, but they injected a new formula, a new style, new energy, and a different type of fun into the racing genre. They were risky in the best way possible, bold ideas executed with just enough resources to make them shine. But today, that space has pretty much disappeared if you haven't noticed. The industry has polarized into two extremes: low budget indie titles that are passion driven and can be good, but they typically fall off the face of the earth without anyone even knowing they existed. And then on the other side, you have massive AAA productions that require guaranteed financial success. Arcade racers sit in the middle of those, if that makes sense. And because the middle of it doesn't really have a place, it no longer has a home. And in fact, it seems like many companies who are in charge of creating great arcade racing titles are leaning towards trying to make them huge financial successes without actually putting in the work that is required for that to happen, resulting in games failing and production being delayed. This economic shift doesn't just affect how games are funded, but it also affects what kinds of games are made at all. When publishers abandon the middle ground, they abandon creative risk, and that's what we like. Arcade racers thrive on making yourself a spectacle, on outrageous mechanics that wouldn't work in realistic racing games, and in the game worlds that just aren't constrained by realism or license deals. But these ideas are hard to justify when your choices are make it cheaply or make it a huge success. Because arcade racers were never in either of those two categories to begin with, that middle space was where fun first design could flourish without the pressure of massive returns. By killing it off, the industry didn't just lose a tier of production, it lost entire games that live and breathe in that zone. The slow death of arcade racing is one of the clearest casualties of that loss. If you go on whatever console you play on and search for new arcade racing games, what you find is not good at all. It's either outdated or it seems to be in such a low production value and we get it's just slop. Another thing that arcade racers have going for them is instant gratification. You load the game, you pick your dream car, and within seconds you are drifting through the city or racing down highways at 200 miles per hour. There were no complex upgrade trees, no daily login rewards, no pressure to really grind in the way that games are now. It was just fun. But the modern gaming industry has shifted away from that design philosophy due to, you guessed it, money. Games are no longer just products that you buy and can enjoy. They're platforms built for continuous engagement. Success is now measured in how much player retention they have, not really the satisfaction of the actual player that plays the game. That means developers prioritize features that keep you coming back daily. Unlockable content and drip feed content, which they love to do, like in games like Call of Duty. They have tiered rewards, progression systems designed to stretch gameplay, all that sort of stuff, right? In that world, an arcade racer, something that you can finish in a weekend and what they pride themselves on, feels outdated, even if it's exactly what players have asked for. This obsession with engagement metrics has put arcade racing at odds with how games are monetized. Publishers want games that support in-game stores, seasonal content, battle passes, a bunch of money-grabbing things. Monetization models that bank on the player investing dozens or hundreds of hours into their game. But arcade racers by design don't really work that way. Hence why in Need for Speed Unbound it feels off to do the speed pass. They're not about long-term progression, they're about immediate payoff. You don't need 50 hours to feel the rush of dodging traffic at 200 miles per hour. You typically feel that in the first 2 minutes in the story, or something along those lines. But what the industry overlooks is that not every game needs to be a service, it needs to be a money grab. Sometimes people just want to have fun, and that's okay. And arcade racing used to be the genre that promised you that fun. Now we have speed passes. The last point is about sim racing, which, don't get me wrong, definitely does more good than bad in the racing genre, but it can also negatively affect the arcade genre. Sim racing has redefined the standards of what the industry expects from a quote-unquote serious racing game. With ultra-realistic physics, laser scan tracks that are one-to-ones, and a huge amount of officially licensed cars, games like iRacing, Assetto, Gran Turismo, all of those have become the face of competitive racing. But because of this pursuit of authenticity, something vital has been lost, and that's the fun and imagination of having an arcade racing game. Arcade racers never pretended to simulate real-world driving. They weren't about tire pressure or braking distance or lines. They were about just feeling fast and seeing what you could do while moving at extreme speeds. They turned the act of racing into a cinematic masterpiece. These games didn't care about realism. They cared about how you felt, about adrenaline, about making you feel like you were truly unstoppable behind the wheel. But as realism became the gold standard, true arcade racing, so not really Forza and Crew, was quietly pushed to the margins. Developers began chasing legitimacy in the sim games instead of an actual thrill. The more accurate a game's car physics became, the more stripped down the experiences got. Tracks became way more realistic and less fun in the sense of arcade racer perspective, and got buried under layers of simulation settings. It created a gatekeeping effect. Suddenly racing was only for the serious players who can invest time, money, and hardware. And while sim racers have a rightful place in gaming, don't get me wrong, we love them. They shouldn't be the only version of what racing can be. Those should not be the only games coming out in the racing genre. We are losing the ability to drive how we want to without feeling the consequences of the real world. If I want to race as accurately as possible, I'm not going to do it on a sim 24/7, I'm going to do it on a real track. But for arcade racers, we are well aware that we cannot do those sort of things in real life, so the only place to do them is on a video game. Critics of arcade racing's place in modern gaming often argue that the genre is outdated, that today's players demand, depth, realism, and long-term progression, and not short bursts of fun and energy. They claim that the casual nature of arcade racers makes them shallow or lacking in skill, especially compared to the precision of sim racing, but that's two completely different things, right? This view misunderstands the value of style in game design. It doesn't only come from realism. It can come from mastering drifting, navigating traffic, or outsmarting police or other racers on tracks. Calling arcade racers shallow because they prioritize fun is like calling Mario Kart meaningless because it isn't F1. It's two completely different things. It's not that arcade racing lacks depth. It's that the depth comes wrapped in joy. It's in a completely different package. Arcade racing games were never just about cars or competition. They were about feeling alive and doing things that are completely unrealistic. They capture the joy of breaking the rules and pushing the pedal through the floor. The decline in these games being made shows a genre shift that seems to be less than ideal for all of those who prefer not to have a $2,000 sim racing setup just to play a game. But it doesn't have to stay that way, and that's what people need to understand, and what these companies need to understand. Arcade racing still has fans, a lot of them, despite what some people may believe. It still has a place in modern gaming, and if the industry has the courage to believe that arcade racing is worth investing in again, then maybe we can get a bunch of these games either back on the market like Midnight Club, or even brand new ones that are focused back on what people truly enjoy. If you enjoyed today's video, make sure to go ahead and drop a like and subscribe, and I will see you all in the next one.